All right, we're ready for Psalm 123, 124, and 125. These are all short psalms. The first one 4 verses, the second one 8, and the last being 5. And so we have ample time to work through those. And also for any practical lessons, and there are many, for you to work in and make your comments about the things that you see practical in these psalms. We begin by taking note of we are in the last book of the Psalms. We are reminded of that each time. I think we have a tendency to forget the Psalms are in books. We remember it while we're here, but then when we get away from the Psalms, a year from now, 2 years from now, we forget these are divided into 5 books. So we're in the last of the books. This one primarily focuses on the Word of God from 107 to 150. Now at Psalm 120, we started into the songs of ascent, or songs of degree. And just a little review of where we came from, or what we came through in our introduction to this section last time. If you were not here last week, when we get through talking about the songs of ascent, and you want an explanation of what the songs of ascent are about, you will know no more than you know now. That's the point we made last time. However, there are 15 such songs. What does it mean they are songs of ascent or songs of degree? I quote again from Haley. He said, various explanations have been suggested for their use and arrangement, none of which are satisfactory. It's impossible now to know definitely. And he's absolutely right about that. These may be songs of pilgrimage, and we'll talk more about that in our study tonight. That one makes as much or more sense than any, that these are songs of their pilgrimage for their 3 annual feast. Though I can't be dogmatic about that. Some think it's more of a general ascent or progression in thought. And there are some connection between one of the psalms to the next psalm often. This one dealing with a problem, this one deals with the answer. But that doesn't succeed for 15 psalms. That is in succession. Scroggie suggests it belongs to the period of Hezekiah, and he's pretty dogmatic about that, if you're following Scroggie at all. He's pretty dogmatic about that as he goes further, that this may have reference to, but it more likely has reference to Hezekiah. And he does that over and over with each one of these psalms. And his argument, one of his strongest arguments is the 15 psalms are representative of the 15 years of his life being extended. Well, that fits, but that doesn't give us any proof of that at all. 10 of these are anonymous, 4 attributed to David, and 1 is attributed to Solomon, making the 15 of the Psalms. The temple seems to be standing, but there is also a presence of an enemy. Most of the 15 talks about some enemy of some sort. It may be at times an individual, at other times it may be a nation, and we'll deal with that as we come to each of the Psalms. So let's talk about Psalm 123. This is obviously, as we ask the type of psalm it is a song of ascent. And so until we get through 134, until you get to the end of that, they're all going to be the psalm of ascent. What do we know about the author of 123? Anonymous. Not given at all, and anything that would be said about that is total speculation. All right, what's the message of this psalm, the point of this psalm? All right, it is a prayer for Jehovah's help, and we'll come to that prayer in just a moment. McLaren said that this is a sigh and an upward gaze and a sigh. I like his description of this, that this is seemingly a sigh, and it is an upward gaze to God, and then ends with the sigh. And we'll say more about that in just a moment. What about the occasion of this psalm? Well, we really don't know about the occasion of it. It may be as they journey to Jerusalem to the feast. And I said that earlier, that this makes more sense to me than some of the other concepts, though I can't be dogmatic about it. This may be as they journey to Jerusalem and after they enter the city. Now, one of the points we made last time, and this is somewhat arbitrary, but some have suggested 120 is as they're approaching Jerusalem. 121, the city is in sight. And 122, they're within the gates of Jerusalem. And 123, they're within the city. Now, there's some arbitrary statements made in that listing. That's not original with me. Some have suggested it fits the Persian period, the post-exile period where we're studying in Sunday morning in our minor prophets, as they came back and they were opposed and they were disappointed, particularly in the days of Nehemiah. We'll see something about that perhaps in 125. Well, may well fit that. And so could I be convinced that they deal with the Persian period? Yes, though I can't be dogmatic concerning that. There is not the voice of an individual, but he seems to speak for the nation. This is going to be obvious, by the way, in Psalm 121, 123, and 124, where he even starts out as a personal statement, but then talks about we before he gets through. And we see that in those two Psalms particularly. Leupold said that it is a quiet, submissive tone that prevails throughout. It is subdued in character. There is no loud complaint concerning this psalm. That there is no impetuous plea. I like what he says about that this is not as, for example, some of the Psalms we've considered earlier, that there is this great outcry over one particular problem and one particular individual that may be an enemy. This seems to be a quiet, submissive tone in Psalm 123, that this psalm may fit in that Persian period, but it may have been on this journey, as we talked about, and we cannot be dogmatic about that. All right, let's look at an outline of Psalm 123. I call it simply a prayer for Jehovah's help, and there's only 4 verses and 2 thoughts that happen in Psalm 123. And so let's work through that, and then there's some practical things that you can list. So watch for that as you go along if you don't have an answer to that. Let's look at Psalm 123 in verse 1 and 2. He talks there about looking to the Lord for mercy, and then 3 and 4, there's the plea to the Lord for mercy. So the thrust of it is the Lord is our help. And there is a companion psalm to that in Psalm 124. There again is some argument for this degree of progression in thought, because he talks about the Lord is the one who delivers. And so we see similar things in 129. But anyway, let's talk about verses 1 and 2. 3 things happen in this first 2 verses. He talks about looking upward. Here's that upward gaze McLaren talked about. Looking upward to God in the heavens, verse 1. Unto you I lift up my eyes, O you who dwell in the heavens. Now, what in light of the rest of the psalm, what's he saying? Where does he look for help? He looks to God who dwells in the heavens. He's the only, one of the things I'm learning, he's the only one that can truly help. There is help that may come to some degree from friends, from fellow man, from your fellow righteous people, but ultimately all help comes from God. The true help comes from God. And one of the things I'm learning is turning to God before we turn in any other direction. Quite often we turn in other directions, and then when that all fails, we turn to God. And so maybe I need to turn to God and ask him for help. He turns to God. He's the only one that can help, and he's the one that dwells in the heavens. Now, what do you see in verse 2? Absolutely. Yeah, so here's an illustration making the point we're dependent upon God, just like, as Ricky just pointed out, that the servant looks to the hand of his master, and the maid looks to her mistress. And they're looking for guidance, for direction. They're looking for help in this context. Some commentators make a play on this word hand, that the eyes of the servant looks to the hand of their master and to the hand of her mistress, but we look to the Lord our God. I'm not sure that there is that great emphasis, but their point is they're looking to the hand, and for the hand to give direction and command and give some help coming from their hand, their strength. That may be the case. I think it's more the idea they look to the one who is their help, the one who is their guide, the one who takes care of them. Tell me what to do. Help me in my time of need. Make sense? And so just as the master is helping the servant and the mistress is helping her maid, so our eyes, verse 2, look to the Lord our God, turning to God for help. So we look to the Lord for mercy. Now in verses 1 and 2, Leupold suggests that he has yet to ask for mercy. He's just saying that's where we look. That's our source of mercy. We look to God. My eyes look upward. We gaze to the heavens, and we look there for mercy. Now in 2b, what do you see in the latter part of verse 2? Yeah, good point. Yeah, he doesn't ask God or turn to God for mercy and receive what he thought, and then he just gives up, but he continues on. Now notice the phrasing. So our eyes look upward to God until he has mercy on us. The word until suggests that God's going to give mercy. He has confidence, number one, he has assurance and confidence God will give mercy in due time. It's not if God's going to give mercy, but until he gives mercy. Does that make sense? He has confidence. Yeah, he has faith, absolutely. But it's also going to be on God's schedule. In other words, we often talk in prayer that sometimes God's answer is yes, sometimes his answer is no, and sometimes God's answer is wait a while. And so he gives us what we ask. He gives us exactly what we're searching for, but it's on his time and on his schedule. But then also is the idea that let's go back and get the whole phrase here. So our eyes look to the Lord our God until he has mercy on us, Leupold and Scroggie, and I think Spurgeon all made the same point, that is a submissive waiting. What would that mean? All right, very good. Yeah, it's the idea of being submissive in obedience to him. I'm going to serve him, even though his help may not come in my timetable. I'm going to serve him in my waiting, not that I'm sitting back and I'll serve you when you give me what I ask. But I'm waiting until he has mercy on us. So I looked up to the Lord until he has mercy on us. It's confidence, assurance. We're going to see that throughout these Psalms. All right, let's get verses 3 and 4, and then we'll come back for some practical things we learn. In verses 3 and 4, there is the plea for that mercy. We look to the Lord for mercy, 1 and 2. We're dependent upon him. We're going to wait for his mercy. But now here's the plea for mercy. So his question is, or his plea, in verse 3, have mercy on us, O Lord. Have mercy on us. Now there's a reason perhaps that, and we see this in the next psalm as well, where a statement is made and then that same statement is repeated. Sometimes that's for poetic purposes. We do that in songs. We may sing a phrase and then we come back and sing that phrase again, and then we may sing that phrase again for poetic purposes, and this is Hebrew poetry, and that's part of the nature of poetry. But seemingly it's repeated for emphasis. Does that make sense? Sometimes in making a point in a sermon, I'll make a point and I'll say, no, I want you to hear that again, and I'll make the same point again. Same words, same phrase, and then I say, I'm going to read it to you one more time. I want you to get that point. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? See what I just did? Yeah, you do it for emphasis. You do it for emphasis. And so the emphasis is, have mercy on. Please give mercy to us. Give us mercy. Now then, verse 4, he talks about the reason for that. What is it? Yes, our soul is, I'm skipping the end of verse 3. For we are exceedingly filled with contempt, and our soul is exceedingly filled with scorn of those who are at ease, with the contempt of the proud. So he mentions two things about what they're receiving and two things about those from whom they receive that. So the first two things he mentions is there is contempt and there is scorn. Well, that would well fit, if Scroggie is right, that would fit with the days of Hezekiah because of the scorn of the king that was invading Israel. I don't think that necessarily fits, but it would, fits that's the explanation of that. But it does fit in the Persian period, in the days of Nehemiah, when you had the Sanballat and Tobiah and others at other periods in this post-exile period who had contempt. Obviously, chapter 4 of Nehemiah, chapter 5 of Nehemiah, we see it even later in Nehemiah. You have the contempt of all those that were around trying to bring the work to a stop. And remember, Cambyses brought the work of the temple to the stop after Cyrus had issued the decree that it begins, and so he brings it to a stop. So it does fit that post-exile period. That does make sense to me, though that I can't be dogmatic about that. So there is the contempt and there is the scorn, the ridicule. Nehemiah 4 talks about that ridicule. They said as they're building the wall, what did they say about the wall to ridicule the wall? Yeah, fox walk upon it, it'll fall down. And so they ridicule and they spread contempt throughout the region. Now, the two things that he mentions about those who are bringing the contempt and scorn is what? They are at ease and they are proud. They've lifted themselves up with pride. They've lifted themselves up with self-importance. They've lifted themselves up as superior to God and to God's people. That's evident in Nehemiah 5, if the post-exile period be correct. Spurgeon made this observation at verse 3. He said, no, that's the wrong quote. He's at verse 4, I'm sorry. Spurgeon made this point that these are people who are at ease because they know no troubles of their own. The easy ones grow cruel. They're easy in heart through the deadened conscience, so that they easily come to mock holiness. They are at ease from needing nothing. They have no severe action exacted from them, no severe toil or ill exacted from them. And then he finally says, place a man perfectly at ease and he derides the suffering godly and becomes himself proud in his conduct. Well, I think he captured the thought that they are at ease, they have nothing demanded of their own, and quite often those are the ones that become proud and bring the contempt upon the ungodly. Well, that was Sanballat, and that was Tobiah, and others in that post-exile period, if that dating be correct. All right, let's talk about practical things. Any questions on what the psalm says first, and then we'll talk about practical things. Short psalm. Plead to God for help. We look to God for mercy. We're dependent on Him, and then the plea is for Him to have mercy because we're surrounded by contempt and scorn by those that are ease and those who are proud. Yes, ma'am. Good point. Good point. One of the things I meant to point out as we went through that psalm, and I hope you caught this, that shift from I to us. And that's why we were quoting earlier some of the scholars who would make the point, this is not the voice of the individual, but he speaks for the nation. So this is an anonymous psalm. We don't know who it was, but he is not talking about what I personally am suffering, like David would often talk about suffering at the hands of Absalom or of Saul. But he starts off with I. So notice at verse 1, unto you I lift up my eyes, to you who dwell in the heavens. And then he says, have mercy on us, verse 3. Our soul is exceedingly filled, etc. So he shifts from I to us. He's speaking for the nation. Does that make sense? All right. Practical things now on Psalm 123 you take home with you. Yeah.
Next thing I thought about is the wicked and how the righteous
Right.
condemning their actions, and just show the extent that they will go, that they will attack a righteous man.
Good point. Very good point. Yes, ma'am.
The fact that they've had the contempt and they've had the scorn, but they're turning still to God. You can go through an awful lot of things as long as you still turn to God.
That's true. Very good. Go through lots of problems. Turn to God and plead for mercy when you have people problems. Who has not had people problems? We've all had them. It might have been some stranger. It might be somebody you work with. It might be somebody in the family. It may be in the church. Every one of us have had people problems. Turn to God. What else? Practical, before we move on. Psalm 124 in a moment. Psalm 123, practical. Good point. God is on his own time schedule. Ricky?
I was just going to say, in our relationships, there is always someone that is superior to us. In the family, husband and wife are the leaders, masters and servants, and enemies and mistresses. In this case, also, the Lord to us.
Good point. Always someone in leadership.
Playing off of Ricky's statement, he says that servants look to the hand of the master and maidservants to the hand of the mistress, but I look up, my eyes look up
Yep.
to God. We need to recognize how much further of authority he is.
Far above all others. All right. Very good. Anything else on Psalm 124? 123. Let's go to Psalm 124 now. In Psalm 124, I like this. I meant to mention this quotation from Scroggie on 123. If we see God through our enemies, we will have a little God, but if we see them through him, they will be as grasshoppers. I like that. Good comment that he made concerning that. All right, this is an alternate outline of 123 from Scroggie, who talks about faith, hope, prayer, and trouble. Prayer for God's help. Good analysis of Psalm 123. Let's go to 124 now. Who is the author? David. David is identified, and I take that to be the case, though some question that. And you say, well, it's written right here in the text. It's not in, it's in some of the Hebrew text. And missing from the Septuagint and some others, I forgot which ones, and so it is questioned, but I take that David is the author. Message of the psalm. All right, a defense is with God, or a deliverance is with God, or I call it simply praise for the rescue from enemies. And again, this may be that progressive thought of the Psalms, where 123 was a matter of asking for help from those that were oppressing them, around them, and then here is the praise for the rescue from the enemies. Is that a direct connection? I don't know. Not sure. I call this psalm, or divide this psalm into two sections. There is the danger, and then there is the deliverance. There is the danger from which we narrowly escaped, verses 1 to 5. There is the deliverance that came from the Lord. Now, the emphasis of this psalm is on the Lord who delivers. That's the point of the psalm. When we get through with the psalm beginning to end, and we walk away with, well, what I see there is the Lord is the deliverer, that's the point. We got it. It is likely, as some have suggested, that this was used in the pilgrimage to help the pilgrims recall the many instances where God had helped his people. Now, this may be talking about one particular occasion, but to sing that and to go through this hymn or go through this song would be a remembrance. God has helped us here, God has helped us there, God has helped us in other places, God has brought us deliverance, God has brought us deliverance, God has brought us deliverance, and he will bring deliverance yet again. So, let's see what he says. Again, we made this point last time about these songs of ascent. If they are designed for the period of the post-exile period, the Persian period, which there is a question mark there, and we're just leaving that hanging. How does David's psalm fit that? Well, it was probably picked up as a psalm of David and used here in the Song of Ascent, like assembling a songbook. This is a Songs of Ascent we're going to use. We're going to borrow one that David wrote. Even though he may have written it much earlier, we're going to adopt it and put it in our songbook. Very likely was the case. But anyway, one writer makes this observation, and I like his observation here, that verse 1 is like a gasp. The excitement with which he begins, and that is, again, compounding for emphasis. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say, if it had not been the Lord who was on our side when men rose up against us, we would have been swallowed, etc. In other words, if you could imagine somebody rushing into the building, here we are sitting here trying to study our Bibles, and suppose somebody just rushed in the building and they start hollering, if it hadn't have been for so-and-so, I would have got killed out there in the streets. They wouldn't calmly say that. They're thankful for the deliverance. They're thankful for the escape. We narrowly escaped. And here is the gasp and the excitement with which he utters it. Had it not been for the Lord, let all Israel say, had it not been for the Lord who was on our side, here's what would have happened. So we would have perished if the Lord had not saved us, verses 1 and 2. Now the danger was a deadly one. How does he describe the danger? Yeah, we would have been. They would have swallowed us alive. When their wrath was kindled against us, the waters would have overwhelmed us. The stream would have gone over our soul. The swollen waters would have gone over our soul. Is he literally talking about being rescued from a water danger? No. He's picturing the danger of the enemy, whoever that may be. We're not told. It's like being overwhelmed in water. I was just rescued from drowning. And had the Lord not been on our side, I would have been swallowed up in the river. I've been swallowed up in the waters. The swollen waters would have overtaken me. This was a deadly danger had it not been for the Lord. All right, questions or comments on verses 1 to 4. Here's the danger from which we narrowly escaped. Now, he's going to say more about that, but he's not through. But we're not told yet. If we're listening to this song for the first time, we don't have a clue yet what he's talking about. We don't know all the details, and we may not know before it's over, but we know this much: there was a danger that he just narrowly escaped. And we know this much: he escaped by the hand of the Lord. Yeah, very good. All right, let's talk about 6, 7, and 8. Now, here's the deliverance that he discusses. He turns and thanks God for the deliverance. Blessed be the Lord. You say, I didn't see the word thanks. That phrase, blessed be the Lord, almost always, if not exclusively, is used with reference to giving thanks to God. And you might find an exception to that, but I don't know that you will. But find that phrase, blessed be the Lord, and I think it's going to be used in the context of giving thanks and praise to God. Make sense? All right. So blessed be the Lord who has given us who has not given us as prey to their teeth. So here's his point. The Lord delivered us as if from the sharp teeth of a beast. Now again, not literal beast any more than the literal waters, but it's like being rescued from the teeth of a wild beast. What else does he say to describe that? Yeah, I escaped as a bird from the fowlers. The snare is broken and we escaped. It's like a snare was set to catch us, like trapping an animal or the trap for the animal, and the trap was broken. And so his point, we'll come to verse 8 to finish that up in a second, but we were delivered from the sharp teeth. This was a deadly danger that our enemies were against us, and our deliverance and our help come from the Lord. All right, now we're going to come back and talk about what benefit it would have been to sing this as you're making your ascent to Jerusalem. But let's get verse 8. Verse 8 says, our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth. Now there's 2 or 3 things we learn from verse 8. What do you learn? Yeah, we rely on God for help. The name of God, I do not think refers to what we call him, but his name stands for who he is and his power. Make sense? All right. Now, who made heaven and the earth? Why mention that? What help does that come in the song? Yes, very good. It shows he's eternal. He was there in the beginning. He made the heavens and the earth, and it shows the power of God. And so again, go back to verse 1. Had it not been for the Lord who was on our side, the one on our side made the heavens and the earth. So it's not a general, it's not a king. It's not a powerful army that's on our side. It's the Lord that's on our side. And he made the heavens and the earth. Had it not been for him, we would have not escaped. And so if you can picture the exclamation with which this must have been sung, were it not for the Lord, let all Israel say, had it not been for the Lord that's on our side, we would have not escaped. And so we were snared out of the hands of the wild beast and from the waters, etc. We were delivered by the power of God. Do you see a connection between 123 and 124, perhaps? Pleaded God for mercy and deliverance from those that surround us, the proud and those at ease, and then we're thankful for the deliverance that we've received. Now, let's ask this question, then we'll go to practical lessons. What do you think this song would have meant if you were making your way to Jerusalem and you're journeying toward Jerusalem on one of the 3 annual feasts, or maybe in the period of the post-exile as you're coming back into the land and things are not as you pictured them they should be, etc., and you're discouraged? What would this song do for you? Who was it? Yeah, it was encourage you. Yeah. Anything else? Gives us hope. It gives us. Absolutely. Can you imagine? Let's go to the days of Haggai, Zechariah, rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the wall, Nehemiah. And if that time period be where this fits, well, again, leave a question mark there. But if that be where it fits, can you imagine being discouraged? I don't know if we'll ever get this done. I don't know if we can ever rebuild. I don't know if we can ever put this all back. And singing a song that had it not been for the Lord, we would not have escaped, and we did escape, and it's by the power of God. If God could do that, he can do this. That's encouraging. And that's what songs are designed to do. We ought to be encouraged from a singing of a song that talks about God's power. All right, practical things now on Psalm 124. Good point. Preparation, anticipation. Good observation. Maybe we ought to do some praying on the way before we get to services, etc. Good point. What else do you learn from 124 you take home with you?
No matter what situation we're going through, it could be worse, and we need to appreciate how God has gotten us through to that point rather than see how bad the situation was in the first place.
All right, good point. Good point.
Donnie, the first part, verse 8, will help us in the name of the Lord. I tie that back to 123 in the first part, verse 1. Unto you I lifted my eyes.
Yeah.
We're often guilty of looking out instead of up.
That is true. Very good. Yeah, I need help, and so I look to someone else, look for some professional that can help me when I need to, first of all, look to God, because that's where my help will come. The more you pray, I think the more you're going to realize how much God answers your prayer. You'll see it time and time again. One more practical lesson. Anybody got one? You-
Verse 5 talks about the swollen water. Swollen water. Swollen water is a flood. So you're flooded, overwhelmed by enemies. So we living here in this world today, as many enemies as we might think
Good point. Good point. Let's go to Psalm 125. These are all good practical things. Psalm 125. We know it's a song of ascent. The author is anonymous, and so the message is what? Yeah, the strength of God's people. He's the protector of God's people. By the way, on Psalm 124, you might make a marginal note to connect that to Psalm 129, and when we get to 129, we'll make a note to go back to 124. Both are dealing with God delivers his people. Meant to make that earlier. All right, Psalm 125 deals with Jehovah, the protector of his people. It is a song or a psalm of assurance. A psalm of assurance. So let's see what happens in this psalm. 5 verses. Let's see if we can make our way through this psalm. Now, Leupold suggests that this fits the time and the days of Nehemiah. This goes back to the question we've been raising every time. So we're not about to settle anything. I'm just going to throw out more questions. Leupold suggests it fits the day of Nehemiah well, he thinks. Well, Scrocky says that Leupold is right, but he thinks probably it fits Hezekiah better. Well, there we go again. I think perhaps it does fit the days of Nehemiah better than Hezekiah. But be that as it may, 3 things happen here. Here's the first. The Lord surrounds those who trust him. And then we're going to see wickedness does not dwell with the righteous, verse 3. And we see that God will bless. He's asked to bless the good and curse those who are evil. So there's some very practical things here. Let's start with the first 2 verses. The Lord surrounds those who trust him, and so he protects them. So those who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which cannot be moved but abides forever. So notice the 2 things here under point 1. That those who are trusting the Lord are like the immovability of Mount Zion. Mount Zion is sitting on a solid rock. Let the earth quake, let the earth shake, let the winds blow, and Mount Zion is going to stand. And so the Lord surrounds those who trust him, and that's compared like Mount Zion that is firm as the mountain that cannot be moved. And as the mountains surround Jerusalem, like the hills that surround Jerusalem. Jerusalem is in the top of the hills, but yet there was hills that surrounded it, which served as a protection for Jerusalem, so that the Lord surrounds his people from this time and forevermore. Now, that's an interesting phrase, from this time and forevermore. So the point is, in verses 1 and 2, the Lord surrounds his people and protects them, and they are like unto an immovable mountain and like a city that is surrounded by hills. The Lord surrounds and protects his people. Make sense? And so when you ever feel like you're overwhelmed, remember, if you trust the Lord, you're like an immovable mountain, and you're like Jerusalem surrounded by hills, and so you're surrounded by your God. All right, now verse 3 sets to itself, talking about wickedness does not dwell with the righteous. Let's qualify verse 3. Verse 3 is not saying that the righteous can never become wicked, or that in the land of the righteous, the land of Palestine, the land of God's people, literally, or even in the church, that sin cannot infest it. It did in both cases. But what it is saying is that wickedness is not to dwell with the righteous. And he tells us why. Let's see what he says. The scepter of wickedness shall not rest on the land allotted to the righteous. In other words, here's the land that was given to the righteous people, and wickedness is not to dwell there. And so here's the point. The rule of the wicked is not to dwell in the land. Lest what? Verse 3b. Yeah, unless they're tempted to do wrong. Lest the righteous should reach out their hands to iniquity. May I quote from Leupold here, said that he's talking here about persons of influence and authority who were apparently unscrupulous in their power that they had. Well, that was going on in the days of Nehemiah. That happened in the days of Hezekiah too. That principle would fit either one. So you could pick about any period. The days of David, the same thing was true. He goes on to say that power and influence were being used in an ungodly way. And the ones who suffered as a result were particularly the righteous. In fact, their unjust suffering and their manifold ways in which they were discriminated against irked them so thoroughly and disappointed them so bitterly that they were ready to abandon their righteousness and become careless about their conduct. Well, that reminds me of the book of Revelation. The pressures put upon the righteous by the ungodly to where they're ready just to throw up their hands and just bow to the wickedness. So his point here is, let's remember our protection comes from God, and God will protect us as long as we're righteous, and sin will not infest us. But if we let sin infest our quarters, then we're going to be tempted then to reach out and participate in the sin. Make sense? The more we're surrounded by sin, rather than being surrounded by God, the more apt we are to sin. Now let's get 4 and 5. What's his request in 4 and 5? It's a plea to God. Yeah. Yes, bless those who are righteous. But notice his description in verse 4. Do good, O Lord, to those who are good and to those who are upright in their hearts. You might underline those who are upright in their hearts. I take it that he's describing those who trust in God, verse 1, and who are righteous at and good at verse 4, who are said to be righteous in other verse 3, are all synonymous. That they're not just righteous in their actions, they're righteous in their heart. Make sense? If you truly trust God, you're not just doing right, you're right in your heart. Comes from the heart. Make sense? All right? Then verse 5, and turn aside to the crooked ways, for as such as turn aside to the crooked ways, the Lord send them away with the workers of iniquity. And then the plea is for there to be peace upon Israel. So bless the good, curse the evil, and really point C should be there, that there might be peace in Israel. Because God is the protector of his people. Make sense? Now that does fit. The more I'm reading of these Psalms, I'm not 100% convinced, but I'm leaning more toward the idea that this very well could be plugged in, at least, to the days of Nehemiah and the post-exile or the Persian period. Because they needed the surrounding of God instead of being surrounded by Sanballat and Tobiah and all the others. And wickedness, if they allow those to reign in the cities, wickedness is going to prevail. And so the plea is, God bless those who are trying to do what's right and defeat those who are wicked, and may there be peace here in Israel. May there be peace here in Israel. And that was the plea. Make sense? Maybe 1 or 2 practical lessons. What are they? Okay. All right. Very good. One more. Danger in dwelling among the wicked, because we then will reach out and touch and participate. We'll stop there. Next 3 Psalms, 126, 127, and 128 next week.